Well, ladies and gentlemen, the long wait is over. Welcome back, finally, to Final Fantasy Freddy's episode 28. Now, for all of you who have been familiar with Final Fantasy Freddy's, and I thank you very much for staying with us this long, I'm surprised that my really annoying voice hasn't steered you off by now. But welcome to this new format of Final Fantasy Freddy's, which I hope you're all going to enjoy, because if you don't, I have just wasted so much time on this. But today we're going to be looking at a very special topic in Final Fantasy history. Today we're going to be looking at Final Fantasy XIV, the game that shouldn't have been, and the game that is. So I'm going to be pretty blunt when I say this, that the history of Final Fantasy XIV begins humbly at Final Fantasy XI, the first online game in the Final Fantasy series. Contrary to popular belief, Final Fantasy VII is not the best-selling Final Fantasy game of all time. It is actually Final Fantasy XI, which I just mentioned a second ago. Now you may be sitting to yourself wondering, why? How did this happen? Well, if you think about it, you're sitting and you're playing Final Fantasy X. You've just got to the ending. You've experienced the entire game, and you're sitting there. The game has ended. You've ejaculated in your trousers. I don't know, you might have done that. I didn't, certainly. But anyway, you're sitting there alone. Possibly, you might have friends, but if you ejaculated over the ending to a game, I don't think you're going to have many friends. But anyway, and then you're sitting there wondering, what next? Where is Final Fantasy going to go from here? What happens? You've already had it on the PS2, which was a revolution in itself. But then, in a couple of months' time, you see Final Fantasy XI has been announced. And you hear that it's online. Now, this was a time when online was like drugs, okay? If you were online, you were the king buddy of your friendship circle. You had it all going on. Your parents must have been rich. You shat out gold bricks if you had, well, maybe not, but, you know. Online was a new concept to games around about this time. Sure, you had Play Online, but if you can name me more than 5 people who have successfully wired their PS2 to the internet, I will be a very happy bunny. But anyway, you sit there, and you see this game. You know people are going to go crazy for it because of the following Final Fantasy had. And thus, the Final Fantasy Empire was born online. But was it such a good idea? Many people's organs writhed and contorted at the thought of an online Final Fantasy, but the critics were more intrigued than repelled. If I was as big a Final Fantasy fan as I am now back then, I sure as hell would have been bugging my parents day in, day out to buy me this game. And I still often do bug them a lot if I need some money or, you know, help of some description. But anyway, parents aside, Final Fantasy VII and other games like that were often seen as what Final Fantasy stood out for. Its story, its gameplay, its characters more than anything. And I personally think that Final Fantasy VII is one of the most charming games ever made. It makes you feel, even if a stone, cold, bloody, what I don't even know what I'm talking about, just words are coming out of my mouth, but someone who strangled people for 11 would sit down and play Final Fantasy VII, and then they would feel something, you know, even if you don't feel anything at all, you will feel something with this game. I think they should use it for people who, you know, are depressed or something, even though it is a kind of upsetting game. I'm getting in a big tangent over here. But Final Fantasy was always known for its story, its characters, and even its scenery as well, which for the time was amazing. Those pre-rendered backgrounds in Final Fantasy VII had never been done before. It was an ambitious project, but Final Fantasy XI was an even bigger ambitious project. Many people overlook Final Fantasy XI because it is an online game, and because of what I mentioned earlier, that Final Fantasy was not known for this. But despite all of this, Final Fantasy XI was a commercial success, and it did lead it to be the best-selling Final Fantasy game, and one of the founding grounds for MMOs that we know today. Unfortunately, by this time, Final Fantasy had been buried and gone. Some say that Final Fantasy XI is the last true Final Fantasy game, despite the fact that it did try and steer away from the original narrative-based games, because following the release of Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy had just lost its following. I mean, everyone hated Final Fantasy XIII, and a lot of people hated Final Fantasy XII, which why it got its nickname, The Final Betrayal. Personally, I think that Final Fantasy XIII is the best Final Fantasy game, but according to everyone else, the entire fucking planet, it sucked. It was at this time that the fangirls had left their caves and come together to celebrate the announcement of Final Fantasy XIV! Then everyone found out it was an online game, leading to this reaction. Yeah. But there was a glimmer of hope! people started to remember Final Fantasy XI and how great that turned out to be, and hopes for Final Fantasy XIV were regained. But it was shit. Final Fantasy XIV did not provide people's money's worth. Despite the game being cheap, the online fees were often seen as ridiculous. The customer service was terrible. The online services were terrible. It was terrible, terrible, terrible! Square Enix pulled the apologetic puppy on us and promised us they would fix the game. And a new update was released shortly afterwards. Guess what? It was shit too! Square Enix realised that Final Fantasy XIV was going nowhere. It wasn't what people wanted, and the very few people that did want it didn't get what they wanted. Even if you did want it in the start, I don't know why, that was your own fault, but anyway. Square Enix started to turn to Final Fantasy XIII, and they thought it'd be a great idea for them to milk that as far as possible. But was Final Fantasy XIV dead? Once Final Fantasy XIII-2 had been released, and Versus hadn't, Square Enix teased their brand new game. The fangirls re-emerged from their dark, damp caves, and were shocked to find out that Square Enix's new Final Fantasy game was Final Fantasy XIV version 2.0. Yay! People who actually liked Final Fantasy XIV sat at home patiently waiting for their game to be updated, only to find out that Final Fantasy XIV 2.0 was another game. Square Enix made so big an oopsie they couldn't even fix the game they already made. If you're wondering what that's a picture of, it's a picture of oopsie bread. You know, it's probably not the best thing to picture an oopsie as, but oh well, it's the best I can do with a creative streak like this. Yay. Depression aside, people actually started to think that Final Fantasy XIV version 2.0, you know, I'm just going to call it 14.2, that's just too much to say. There had been very little news about the game, so everyone thought that the game was dead and gone. Everyone hoped that the game was dead and gone. Until I'm just going to stop for a second here. If you're familiar with Final Fantasy Freddy's from the start, and I mean the very start, when I was a young child full of naivete, I did on my separate channel, Gamerscope 2210, which I really hope you aren't, because that was just diabolical, those videos, they were really bad. But the first ever episode of Final Fantasy Freddy's was all about Final Fantasy XIV and how it had changed. Now the biggest piece of news was that Final Fantasy XIV had changed its name from version 2.0 to A Realm Reborn, which was left with a mouthful to say. So it was good, and it sounded really cheap and nasty and weirdy. Just roll picture. Now with a logo this cool, you're going to know, or at least hope, that the game's going to be super awesome, because we all know that neon is the international symbol of super awesome. A Realm Reborn actually did look pretty good. It sounded good, and we did see some footage of it for the first time. It looked much downgraded than Final Fantasy XIV graphics wise, which was understandably a good idea, because with Final Fantasy XIV they tried to make the graphics really good for MMOs, but I just don't think the MMOs are ever going to get to the same kind of graphics of a linear based game. But A Realm Reborn did this, and it still managed to look like perfection. A Realm Reborn began its journey off as a bold and vast statement to the Final Fantasy universe, and believe it or not, people were actually excited for this online Final Fantasy. For the first time, people were anticipating a Final Fantasy game, which is really rare because, like, nobody likes it at all. I don't really know what the reaction to A Realm Reborn actually looks like in a manifesto, so have this Breaking Bad picture that I actually kind of liked, and it's kind of cute as well. Actually, it's really creepy in retrospect. I'm sorry for showing you that. Back to Final Fantasy. If A Realm Reborn stands out in one area, it would be boldness. This game wanted to erase Final Fantasy XIV, and to do that you had to have balls. This game was so diabolical, it was going to stay in everyone's shit-stained trousers for months on end. But A Realm Reborn actually did erase this game. Final Fantasy XIV almost cost Square Enix everything. It had that big a commercial failure, it almost destroyed the company that created Final Fantasy. Which is a hard thing to do, because they made Final Fantasy. Come on. They're like gods to us, they're our deity. So A Realm Reborn got people excited for Final Fantasy again. But guess what? Its launch was a complete failure. Now, Realm Reborn has only been out for a couple of weeks, and these issues still persist for anyone who has purchased the game. If you get to play a couple of hours in that game, you're so lucky, especially at the start. The game was so popular that Square Enix had to stop sales of the game, postpone downloadable sales for a couple of days, just until everything calmed down. but were the fans as pleased with the game as the critics were? Now, to find this out, I would have to go around every single Final Fantasy fan and ask them what they felt about the launch of A Realm Reborn. And it's just impossible to do that, to find all 5 of you. But anyway, fans, from my opinion, weren't happy with this. I looked for hours and hours upon these feeds that they had left on the Square Enix page, and people were pretty pissed. Really pissed. But to me, there was one fan that really stood out from the rest. Now, this guy wasn't pissed about the long loading times, the AFKs taking up the servers, the bad launch. He was disappointed about asses. Yes, butts. Butts of cats. The good people over at Square Enix had significantly reduced the size of the Mikote rump, for want of a better word. And this guy was pissed, because he's a virgin and he has no girlfriend or friends, and the only thing he can get off to is the butts of 3D cats on a screen. I take my hat off to you, sir! So putting aside the bad service, the bad launch, the lagginess of the servers, the bad customer services, the bad online services, the AFKs taking up all the servers, no 15-minute idle kick, and really small cat asses, A Realm Reborn did pretty good. I mean, IGN liked it, so it must be fucking fantastic. My favourite part of A Realm Reborn is the beautifully done promotional art, which is fantastic, and I have it in my wallpaper right now. I just want this so badly as a poster. It looks so badass. Not that kind of ass, even though that is a pretty bad one. I don't want to look at it anymore. Final Fantasy XIV has had a bold evolution, a bold history, and it's something that should be recognised in the Final Fantasy universe. Whether it's bad, and it is bad, it's very bad, but it's something that managed to drag itself out of a hole. Now, for a video game to do that, it is pretty hard. Look at Duke Nukem. It wasn't even in a hole, and it made a hole that wasn't even there bigger. That's how bad that was. But Final Fantasy XIV is something that should be recognised as a commercial and global failure in video gaming history, and it should be something that no other developer repeats. I really do hope that Square Enix stop with the online Final Fantasies. A Realm Reborn is enough to keep us going for hours on end, years on end. It's going to be something that's always there, something that we can go back to, something we can enjoy. It's good to have these Final Fantasies in between the ones that are breaking them up, but not all the time. This has been Final Fantasy Fridays. Thank you for watching. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that was the return of Final Fantasy Fridays, and welcome to Season 2. What I want you guys to do for this week is I want you to let me know what you think of the new format. Now, I think you guys deserve to know what's going on, why I've been away for a while. The thing is, I've got a lot of stuff going on right now in my life, my personal life. I have a lot of coursework to get through, a lot of exams, and I know how you guys are more familiar with the weekly based Final Fantasy Fridays, the news kind of show thing where I talk. Oh shit, my glasses. I always do that. I always knock them off the stupid bench thing. But you know, the thing where I just talk over the picture and everything. But I realised since this is going to be impossible to do because I'm away working a lot, and I'm not away to work. I don't have a job. I'm not that ready for society yet. But you know, I have a lot of coursework and exams coming up. I've done a couple of exams, and I'm really chuffed with the results of them. So, but I'm not going to get on with all this. But so I realised that a weekly show is really going to be hard to do, and I know you guys have been patient, but I want you just to be more appreciative of how long Final Fantasy Fridays can take. Even the ones where I did just talking over pictures, that I didn't put as much work into them as I did before, but I've more better equipped now. I want to make better quality videos since you're not going to be getting them as frequently. I know you guys are going to be pissed off at this, but I really cannot say I can't give you a time scale for each episode because it's just going to be pretty random. But I have got the next 5 episodes. They're all planned out, and I'm ready to go and record them. Really looking forward to doing it. I really think we can really do something great here. But yeah, the next episode, I'm going to tell you what the next one's about and all that. I'm going to be doing an episode about Final Fantasy versus Tales. Now, if you haven't played Tales, it's sort of like the competitor to Final Fantasy, like Tales of Exilia, Tales of Grace's Future, Tales of Symphonia, Tales of Vesperia, Tales of the Abyss, all that. They're sort of competitors to Final Fantasy, but not that many people have heard of them. So that's what next week's episode is going to be about, and I'd appreciate it if you guys would tell me in the comments any episodes at all that you got ideas about, any topics you want me to discuss, anything at all, I will take them. They will be up. I can't say when they'll be up, but I do appreciate all of your feedback, everything. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. I didn't mean to say guys. I meant guys for being very patient with me. And I hope this can be the start of something great. So, I'll let you enjoy the end card. Thank you all very much for watching. And here's to a great future. Ciao.